Okay, thanks for the invite. What I'm going to talk to you about is, well, first of all, I'll introduce myself because everybody knows who Tim Snow is in this room, but not everybody knows what I do or have been doing. I worked in formal conservation for 24 years, national parks, Transvaal, Natal Parks Board, and the latter derivatives, and then I went to the Endangered Wildlife Trust and worked in the Poison Working Group, which was established to address the threats of poison to vultures predominantly in the early 90s. I went and worked with them full time from 90. I was a volunteer initially, then I worked as a part of the group voluntarily from 95 until 2001. In 2002 I started working full time and I stayed with EWTN until 2012, by which time the poison working group had mutated into the wildlife conflict mitigation program, and there were a variety of programs all based on pesticides and wildlife, but just losing a little bit of focus. At the beginning of July 2012, I started a little sole proprietor business called Wildlife Poisoning Prevention and Conflict Resolution, and I registered that as a non-profit organisation at the beginning of this year, and I'm in the throes at the moment of registering it as a public benefit organisation, so that when you guys donate resilience to me, I can give you a certificate so that you deduct it from the tax. What's wrong with your laptop? Okay. Challenges that we face is basically farmers have to make a living. They don't have to use pesticides, but it's highly beneficial to them to use pesticides because they can expand their crop production and their animal husbandry and animal production without expanding the land estate that they use. So conserved land remains conserved and agricultural land is optimally used. Pesticides become a part of it. And the way we need to achieve that is farmers actually produce appropriately, they manage the land appropriately, and for them to do that, people like me need to get out into the communities, improve the community literacy, and by that I mean literacy about pesticides, their attitudes, their abilities, and their resources. So they need to know this pesticide is that and that and that. It's not the same as that one. And this is how you apply it. And this is how many milliliters per litre over so many hectares of land. So calibration of their equipment and that sort of thing, that kind of attitude, so that they know what to do and know how to do it. And the issues need to be balanced, because we can jump up and down as much as we like and say, well, people must not poison people. We need legislation in place. We need international legislation, we need national legislation, and we need provincial legislation, all of the legislation, all the way down. I don't know how to scroll down this thing.
Oh, well, jump.
Okay. So, for example, there's an African Convention on conservation of nature and natural resources. 41 countries have signed. I think another 2 have signed since I did my research into this earlier this year. But there's no secretariat, there's no domicile, it's just the African Convention. All of the politicians went to a big meeting and they had a lot to eat and a lot to drink, and they jabbed it away and took notes, and they came home and that was it. So here's this African Convention. I'm working with the Department of Environmental Affairs, hoping that we're going to get this breakthrough that says, yes, they've got the funding to do it. The Fundacilio Mkhitaryan is very tired of the Lorana issue at the moment, but he's the man who might make it happen. And all I need to do is say, we set that little office aside and that administrative person aside to run this convention. So there's a secretary that hosts it. and give it a little bit of a budget so that it can actually run more. So we've got this fine legislation. Many countries have national legislation to control chemicals. South Africa has got Act 36 of 1947. It was actually quite a good piece of legislation.
1947.
No, now still it was actually very well written. But the trouble with legislation is sometimes it says the penalty for this will be £1,000, which in 1947 was an arm and a leg, but is not so appropriate anymore. In recent years, the judiciary has imposed a fine of R1 million on a chemical company who spilled and didn't clean up or whatever it is. Now, R1 million in terms of chemical companies is chicken poo, because consider that the net profit of Bayer AG in Leverkusen, Germany, in the year 2008 was 27 billion euros. So if you charge them R1 million fine, so what? I'm also a member of the United Nations Environmental Programme Convention on Migratory Species, Minimizing Poison Working Group. And we've been working on a number of issues dealing with the migratory birds, trying to make the migratory routes a little bit safer, doing work on the ground, work with the quillia management programs, malaria management programs, various chemical departments, Ethiopian Department of Agriculture, Chad Department of Agriculture, and others. And we are working also a little bit with Save the Vulture Foundation in India, because diclofenac it's the veterinary Voltaren equivalent. If an animal is injected with diclofenac and that carcass, the animal dies, that carcass is fed to the vultures, it induces visceral gout in the vultures and a whole lot of other things, leading to the crash of vultures in India and leading to additional problems in Africa, South Africa, throughout East Africa, and the European Union Parliament very recently considered registering in Europe. So we've taken steps to make them aware that this thing is a vulture killer. It's a killer of any bird of prey that feeds on the carcass. So we are seeking an international ban through COP, whatever COP it is that's happening now in November. We'll hear our presentation to them about that ban. So what about where do these chemicals come from? Well, they're obsolete stockpiles. All over South Africa, Africa, there's been an attempted cleanup in Limpopo province. There was a little bit of a cleanup in KZN, but the World Bank gave the Department of Environmental Affairs $12 million. 12 million rand, which they used in Limpopo. And then when 11 million was finished, people started saying, okay, well, what about the rest of South Africa? And then it became ish. Well, from that program, we moved 85 tons of obsoletes. It all got sorted out. The stuff that was still current chemicals got sent back to the manufacturers for redistribution. The stuff that was not chemical products like pallets and contaminated stuff was disposed of another route, and 85 tons went down the N3 to Durban Harbour, got on a ship and went to Pontypool in Wales, where there's an incinerator that burns at 1,800 degrees C that was hot enough to dispose of it. But the crux is that we've got to sort out that problem. We've got to get farmers to realize that they are sitting on a time bomb of obsolete pesticides that are available for abuse. Criminals, poachers are experimenting with that stuff all the time. We know, for example, there's a product used to be used on sheep called Vanad. It's a dip material. as methamex. It's an insecticide. But 21 teaspoons of methamex spread over a bowl of Lucerne is enough to kill a full-grown 3-ton rhino. So we've had methamex. Methamex was the product that was implicated now in the most recent poisoning of 36 or 39 jackals at a different park. Somebody went in and threw out poison bats. Now, what are the human-induced threats are that protein and root harvesting. Protein harvesting in the form of killing animals for bushmeat, not so much in South Africa. Root harvesting, vultures, you know, if you grind up, Ben can tell you, if you grind up the head of a vulture, put it through a nice, what is that Kenwood thing that mashes it? Blender. And then you put a couple of grams of that into your tea, makes you farsighted, so you can predict the outcome of a lotto, or horse racing, whatever. It makes you really be able to see almost as far as you go. Bushmeat harvesting as a social issue, killing of guinea fowls, francolin. We've had crows killed with that, and then predator issues where farmers indiscriminately put up meat mines to kill predators. And then the other pesticide threats, accidental spillages. There have been a couple of those where chemicals are spilled into water bodies. Incorrect dosage and application methods, basically apathy because the farmer doesn't read the label. It gives his tractor driver this container and the tractor driver works in guesswork. And then obsolete stockpiles that I've spoken about. And then little bit environmentally incompatible uses, like the farmer using an incorrect dipping remedy that kills oxpeckers or cattle egrets or that type of bird, or which may kill birds of prey feeding on the carcass. There are two legs to this solution. Education is leg one, and enforcement is leg two. So how can we get this sustainable balance between education and enforcement? Well, I work with systems thinking. Systems thinking is an analysis of cause and effect. And that's cause and effect of the problem and cause and effect of the management action applied to resolve the problem. Because if you apply the wrong problem, the wrong solution to the problem, you're not going to solve it. So we need to make farmers aware of the correct choice and how to apply them correctly. And then we need the proactive and reactive interventions, the proactive teaching the community of practice who can be the leaders and trainers. So you have a bit of a pyramid where you have trainer training, master trainers training, the next level of trainers training community, so that someone like me doesn't run themselves ragged trying to cover the whole of Africa by myself. And then you provide the reactive side of that, which is the side that says, okay, well, once those trainers are trained, you need to support them. You need to do the investigations. You need to do the follow-ups. You need to do the analysis of the pesticides. You need to collect the specimens, get them for analysis to the lab, get the results back to the investigating officer for the court case, and then get a successful prosecution, and then get back to the chemical company whose product caused the problem in the first place, so that they can put in some steps to prevent a reoccurrence. So who are we talking about? We're talking about conservation officers, police, community volunteers, farmers, magistrates and prosecutors, right down. Then the legislation and enforcement side of it is much harder to do because it needs strong legislation that's supported by political will in the interest of all. We've seen with the rhino poaching situation where people get anything from a slap on the wrist to 77 years in Nelspruit Court the other day. 215 million shillings in Kenya, that's about $235,000. And so while there's some appropriate fines going on, rural Sitan or whatever, depending on the Chinese bloke who has been sitting in jail for about 18 months, awaiting final sentencing. It appears likely that he's appealed for clemency, and it's likely that they're going to reduce his sentence for 20 years. I don't know how many rhinos horns he was caught with. I think it was something like 30 horns in his suitcase and 9 more horns in his mate's suitcase. So, you know, that enforcement side of things needs to be taken seriously. And I've mentioned rhinos here. The whole country's up in arms. Even at taxi ranks, people are talking about rhino poaching. But this little thing of vulture poison is just going under the radar. So, you know, Gary, these things are not only not fitting on the screen, but they're coming up in random order.
That's just like you said.
All sorts of nasty things. I'll hit you for this.
Yeah, that's all right.
This, don't worry about that slide, it's just for information. There are different color bands that the World Health Organization uses, and they use it internationally. Red, if you see a red band on a chemical label, it's extremely hazardous. Yellow, moderate. Slightly hazardous. Blue. Red is clear. Green.
What do you do about this band?
No, be careful of that. Okay, so the farmer is a critical part in this whole thing. He needs support. He's in control of the chemicals. He holds the key to responsible use. He transports the stuff. He stores the stuff. He's responsible for its security. So the farmer is a key person in who we want to have in our equation. We don't want this kind of storage. This picture was a store that I found in Coffin Bar in the Eastern Cape, near to Queenstown. When I first went there, we went in through the door. It wasn't completely secure because they sent a piccaninny as a quidin in the Eastern Cape. He went through the window under the wire latch. He went through the window to unlock the door from the inside. When we got back, the windows and doors had been looted. Inside that store was 550 kgs of DDT and a whole lot of other chemicals. Took us a day. It was about 2 tons of chemicals in total. It took us more than a day to rebag that stuff, pack it and ship it for safe disposal. This was a store at Umarella Farm near Warden in the Free State. Random distribution of chemicals, all sorts of stuff all together. That farmer lost 7 or 8 cows because he got his staff to clean out the old store. He inherited the farm, but he was a school teacher, so he couldn't afford to go farming initially. When he thought, now's the time, when he started to clean out the store, make a big fire and burn it, the cows went and licked the ash, 7 cows died before they realized it was wrong. And then there's stuff like this Dealgrid. Dealgrid was taken off the market in South Africa in 1971, banned in South Africa in 1982. There's the drum, still standing there, almost a full drum. So we don't want poisonings. And I'd like you to have a look at this slide. There are a few characteristics here. This is what's happening in India. Lots and lots of birds being killed there. This is a very classical stance of a bird that's been poisoned. So it's sitting like that, droopy head, and eventually when the cholinesterase inhibition happens, it means its neurological functions slow down, then it'll lose control of its further extremities first. So from here, it's going to sit down on its bum because they can't hold it anymore. And then it'll still try to fly when you get close to it, but it can't run anymore. And eventually, depending on the degree of poison, it's unable to control its nervous system, its body functions. This was a case at Volta in Botswana. Aerial view. here are vultures. About 460, if I remember correctly. Now, how would we find a situation like that? We know there was a case of a farmer in Botswana shooting a donkey and lacing with poison. And one of our reporters went there. Interestingly enough, he'd seen these guys walking around with a gun. A day or two later, he was going past, so he turned in and went and had a look around, and there was the poison donkey and all of the vultures. The reality of the South African scenario, let's just say the Southern African scenario, is that wildlife poisoning is surging. The big animals get found, the vultures get found. We don't know what's happening with doves and pigeons. We pick up those seed-eating birds and that every now and then, but you know, if 200 doves eat poison and they die over a square kilometre, how the heck is anyone going to find them? Somebody walking through picks up one dead dove. So what? It's a dead dove. And the most abused chemicals are in wildlife crime. Chemic, it's aldehyde or two-step. It's now off the market. No longer sold in South Africa. Although it's still out there and will be for several years until it's used.
What is the replacement they use for pineapples now instead of chemical?
There is a replacement that's been used in sugar cane. I don't know what they're using in
It's not
pineapple.
poison for
It's not, it's less, it's not so much of a risk. If you think about the toxicity of chemical, 0.9 milligrams per kilogram body weight.
What does that mean?
That means 90 milligrams for a robust young fellow like me. It's about,
What's that enough to kill you?
yeah, about a quarter teaspoonful. And there's a case recorded of a lady up in Limpopo whose husband drank too much, so take note, gang. Husband drank too much. She made him a salmi, cheese and tomato salmi with a few granules of kenny. It resembles little gunpowder, black pepper, if you like, sesame seeds. Not sesame seeds, poppy seeds. And he ate the salmi, and that was his goodbye. It's quite a gory story because she didn't know what to do then, so she cut him up and put him in the kettle. When everybody asked where the worm had gone, she said he's gone to visit family in the cave.
It's a love story.
It's a real love story. And when he didn't come back for a month or 6 weeks later, they started asking questions, and somebody then got this whiff from the dip and said, well, I think we should look there, and then they found the worm in the dip. Brilliant story. We should have blocked all the girls' ears before I told that. The next one on the top of the pops list is Curita or Furadan north of our borders. It's carbofuran. It's 10 times less toxic than temi. Predominantly withdrawn. FMC Chemicals had a buyback or a retrieval program in East Africa, but even after that, we still found some cooker shops that had it on the shelves, and there's been a hue and cry because there's been kids killed with it. It's used for all sorts of off-label things. And then further down here, in case you can't read that, Methamex, and then below Methamex and Namac, and then below that a whole suite of other things in lesser volumes. And I'm really sorry about this, because this is the horror side of the lot. Can I have a swig of beer while you have a look at your computer?
I don't know, you're just going to say the numbers, I don't know how we can.
You don't know how to.
You can have a swig of beer.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Did you want to or I can do that?
I think when you're not running a Microsoft, are you?
Sorry?
When you're not running Microsoft on this.
No, it's not. It's open
That's
office.
open
Yeah.
office, you probably did like the
Yeah.
on Microsoft.
Yeah, that's well.
That's what it is.
You just want to next details of yeah.
That's another John said Gary, SMS or WhatsApp.
No, come on. I'm filming that really.
Okay.
These all the price stations is better interest coming through.
Let me just tell you of a few of the examples of these that I remember out of my head. Elephant poisoning in Gonarazor, May 2012. One elephant, Lysotemic, killed 183 vultures. The perpetrators, we believe they killed the vultures to make them not take off, because when you see vultures spiraling in the terminal, they're going up. That's where the carcass is. You don't generally see them when they're coming in. The delay gives them time from Gonarazor to get across the Mozambique border.
So you're poaching an elephant and you're lacing it with poison in order to give you time to get away.
Yes.
So that the vulture signal's not there.
The vulture signal's not there to the right. 200 vultures poisoned in Waka, up in Namibia. We don't know how many there were because the conservation officer didn't count them. He just made piles and said fire to them. The 460 that I spoke about in Botswana, 56 in Swartberg gave a poor response. 28, I think, in the Kruzi Game Reserve. 37 recent death of flows excluded. And the examples go on and on and on. Those are the ones we know about.
So how long can, sorry to interrupt, but how long can the vulture population sustain this sort of attrition?
No, I think that they've tipped the scales. The vulture starts breeding in about 6 years again, 6, 7 years. They lay one egg every year, every second year. If you kill adult vultures on a carcass that have a chick on the nest, the chick's going to die as well. If the adults get back to the nest and regurgitate meat for the chicks are going to die anyway. So very often in cases you're wiping out a whole population. Talking about the elephants. We don't know of any rhino poisoning cases as yet. We've had an attempt. You'll recall the little rhino that was shot 9 times. The mother was killed. The little animal was taken and kept in a boma on the farm. The poachers went there, shot it 9 times. It didn't die. The shots raised the alarm, and that was nursed back to health control zoo. That crime scene had a bag of cabbages all cut in half and laced with a blue powder that we checked for all sorts of things, but we didn't test for rodenticides. Eventually the police lab came up with powdered rodenticides. So they know about it. We've had Kruger Park Rangers stop people who have had metamix in their possession, trying to go through the gates. We have had elephants in Zimbabwe beginning of last year. At the end of the dry season, the poachers take a 20-litre plastic container, cut off the top, they sink that into the ground, fill it with water, and lace it with cyanide from there. Cyanide is a powder, lace it with cyanide from the former gold mining operations. Elephant comes there, it's the end of the dry season, they're nice and thirsty, they drink their 20 litres of water, bingo, jackpot, down the go. 132, I think that was eventually the accurate count. Facebook and the media pushed it over 500, but it was 132. Earlier this year, 6 elephants just north of Victoria Falls, a village in that Masiwa park just across on the Zambian side, also with cyanide. Now, are the people killing them because they're scared of them walking into them at night? Or are they killing them for the ivory? You know, I'm not sure.
Didn't we have our first elephant also poisoned now a couple of months ago? There was an article.
I don't think it was poison, I think it was posh. One out of 4.
I thought it was
Okay, so the best course of action is some positive engagement to minimize poisoning. There's a serious need for us to move from the talking to some serious actions. We need to be able to get to the poisoning sites and pick up clear the sites, take away those carcasses to destroy the toxic source. And then we need to analyze specimens so that we can know what the pesticide is, so we can go back into the chemical industry to have some kind of response. And then we need people on the ground to know how to deal with it so that we get proper investigations, proper enforcement, because in many cases people come across a dead bird and they say it's a dead bird.
Tim, is a thing we're talking to the community working there? Or is that pie in the sky thing?
It is a little bit of pie in the sky, but I do believe there's some positive spin-offs. If there's community work going on, for example, if one is working the old district conservation officer system and community conservation officer system that worked in KZN. If there's somebody talking to a group of farmers or a community group, or the Midlands for the ladies of the district who, many are farmers' wives, who take forward that message of minimizing poison availability, pesticide availability for them. Just securing the pesticides is a big step forward. So that talking does help. I think it does help. I think we need to get that African Convention working so that we've got a cross-boundary piece of legislation. And we need each country to have legislation. So, how do you bring that about? It's a lot of, it's paper wrangling. It's really going and meeting with government officials who can turn the key if they want to. And then reminding them next week. And reminding them again in 2 weeks' time. And next month, and next quarter, and next semester, and next year, until something happens. Because we all know, we go to hundreds of meetings, we sit in a meeting, blah, 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 fish boats, everybody goes home and had lovely lunch, 3 beers, and they go home. And so what happened yesterday is forgotten.
So, and again, sorry to interrupt, so as we're sort of unmanned aircraft centric here, what can an unmanned aircraft do to help the situation?
I didn't even prime him to ask that question. Well, the surveillance side of it, on a bigger scale, on a larger scale, I think you'd have somebody into a group like Zapwin picking up a carcass, saying, look, well, this carcass was poisoned because there aren't dead creatures now. But the UAS is a hell of a lot less expensive, not as mobile as an aeroplane flying from point A to point B, but on the ground can spend a lot of flying time to locate the dead specimens, to give you a photograph so you can say, well, this is what we see now, print the photograph, okay, we're going to do that. You're going to print a grid so you can say, Okay, that rhododendron has got 10 birds. Pick up 10 birds, please. Bring them back with you. And so clearing the site becomes easier. And then checking the site after to put up the drone again and resurveying and saying, okay, well, here's one that we missed, here's one that we missed. So making the site safe and clearing away the victims is a good one.